Isaiah chapter 29 begins without an introduction or a greeting. It opens with a sudden prophetic cry. Woe to Ariel, to Ariel. Ariel is a cryptic, multi-layered nickname given by the prophet to the city of Jerusalem. This is the city where King David dwelt, a place of historical strength, yet the prophet marks it for a period of immense suffering. These verses trace a descent into death and a sudden restoration, diagnosing a spiritual blindness that remains throughout the narrative until it meets the cross. The structure of this chapter provided the apostles with their evidence for Christ's mission and gave the church fathers a tool to identify the hypocrisy within the human heart. In the late 8th century BC, King Hezekiah sat on the throne of Judah. Publicly, he was a reformer, restoring temple worship after a generation of idolatry. But an existential threat loomed. The Assyrian Empire under Sennacherib was systematically conquering the region and moving toward Judah's borders. Panicked by the Assyrian advance, Hezekiah's advisors sought a secret military alliance with Egypt, hoping Pharaoh's cavalry would ensure their survival. This created a divide between Judah's outward religious reforms and its covert, secular reliance on foreign military power. Isaiah campaigned against this maneuver. He insisted that relying on Egyptian horses was a fatal illusion and demanded total trust in the Holy One of Israel. Isaiah's prophecy targets the internal rot of this leadership. He identifies the hidden agendas within the walls as a greater danger than the Assyrian army outside them. To understand the judgment, we must deconstruct Ariel. The first layer, R and L, the city of God. A second layer, Re and L, the Lion of God, reflecting Jerusalem's image as an untouchable, conquering power. But the prophet introduces a third meaning, the altar hearth. This wordplay shifts the city's identity. The prideful lion becomes the very altar upon which its own people will be consumed in judgment. Verse 4 describes a total humiliation. The once mighty voice of the city is reduced to a muffled whisper rising from the dirt. The text uses the Hebrew term ov, referring to a necromancer. Jerusalem's speech sounds like a ghost being weakly conjured from the underworld. The punishment mirrors the transgression. The leaders who sought counsel from the dead rather than from God find their own voices buried in the dust. Verses 2 through 7 form a chiasmus, a symmetrical pattern. The first half tracks downward, the city's distress, the siege, and Ariel brought to dust. Then a sudden pivot. Instantly, the dust of Jerusalem's humiliation becomes the dust of its enemies blown away. This structure is held together by the rare Hebrew verb tsuk, which means to press or to distress. God uses tsuk to press Jerusalem in judgment, but then applies that same force to crush the opposing armies during their deliverance. This literary design demonstrates that the siege is a controlled event. It brings the city to the edge of death, so that its rescue feels like a sudden resurrection. Beyond the military threat, verses 9 and 10 describe an internal spiritual crisis. God pours out a spirit of deep sleep upon the people's prophets and rulers. This is tardema, a divinely ordained stupor, the same profound spiritual anesthesia God used to place Adam into a deep sleep. In Romans 11, the Apostle Paul links this passage to the creation of the Gentile church, suggesting that a period of spiritual sleep was necessary for a new work to begin. The result of this stupor is that the prophecy becomes a sealed book. To Judah, the word of God is now an impenetrable text. Isaiah presents a paradox. The literate man cannot read the prophecy because the book is tightly sealed. The illiterate man is limited by his lack of skill. The meaning remains completely inaccessible to everyone. Reliance on human wisdom has resulted in a divine blindness, leaving the people unable to perceive the very words meant to guide them. If the book of prophecy is sealed to all of humanity, the question remains, who is authorized to reveal its contents? St. Jerome points to the vision in Revelation. Only the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Lamb who was slain, has the authority to break those seals. A typological line connects Isaiah's sealed words to the scrolls of Ezekiel, and ultimately to the scene in Revelation 5, where the seals are finally opened. Jerome argues that the crucifixion provided the resolution to this tension. He identifies the moment Christ spoke to the dying thief as the point when the seals were finally removed. When the temple veil tore, the blindness described by Isaiah ended. This fulfilled the promise that the deaf would finally hear words of the book. Christ used this exact language in Matthew 11 to identify himself as the Messiah, noting that the blind see, the lame walk, and the deaf hear. The prophecy of Isaiah finds its necessary resolution in the events of the New Testament. The sacrifice of Christ reveals the meaning that was previously hidden. The root cause of this spiritual blindness is found in verse 13. God observes that while the people draw near with their mouths, their hearts remain far away. Christ applied these words to the Pharisees, turning a geopolitical critique into a judgment against religious hypocrisy. John Chrysostom compared the soul to a wax tablet. He taught that it must be cleared of old, worldly inscriptions before the words of the teacher can be written upon it. Maximus the Confessor applied this judgment directly to the modern believer, asking them to examine the gap between their public devotion and their private thoughts. Maximus warns that honoring God liturgically while harboring secret worldly anxieties constitutes a failure of the heart. This is why the Church reads this text during the 4th week of Great Lent. It serves as an audit of the distance between our words and our hidden intentions. Every believer faces the choice of Ariel. We will either be an altar where our hypocrisy is judged, or an altar where we offer God a unified and sincere heart.